I'm Elaine Cozart, and I'm going to be giving you a reflection on today's theme, Can We Grow Peace? And I will say it was very challenging for me because although I was considered the peacemaker in our family when I was little, I can't say that I've always been a very peaceful person. So when Joyce asked me to reflect on whether we can grow peace, I honestly struggled with a response. The definition of peace that seemed relevant is freedom from disturbance and tranquility. We have to start with ourselves and be peaceful in our own hearts and minds before we can bring peace to the wider world. At least that's what I believe. I'm currently reading the book, I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. It seemed timely for this service because it caused me to consider how the role of culture, family systems, and personal perspective can impact a person's ability to create peace. In Malala's book, she talks about the Pashtunwali Code, and she describes it in this way. We are supposed to take revenge for wrongs done to us, but where does that end? If a man in one family is killed or hurt by another man, revenge must be exacted to restore neng, or honor. It can be taken by killing any male member of the attacker's family. Then that family, in turn, must take revenge, and on it goes. And there is no time limit. While Malala rejects the Pashtunwali Code, many in her community don't. The idea that one must take revenge in order to restore honor is a belief that runs deep within an entire culture. Granted, it isn't our culture, but it causes me to reflect on other influences that we may not be aware are holding us back from peace. Beliefs or ideologies can limit our ability to be forgiving and show empathy, two qualities I believe are important in spreading peace. So, coming back to the here and now, I consider Joyce's original question, which is, can we grow peace within ourselves? Well, I believe we absolutely can. I believe it's possible if we're willing to do the internal work, to look inside and identify our own beliefs about what we can bring to this world, how we want to show up in our relationships with others, and what we want to contribute in the relatively short amount of time that we have here. Personally, I've become a more peaceful person in the last several years. I've been fairly introspective most of my life, but it has been really more recently that my approach to conflict is calmer. Things that typically bothered me are now a bit less irritating, offensive or worthy of reaction. And it's been a process to stop and consider, to take the time to stop and consider a situation or another person's state of being before allowing that anger to cause me to raise my voice or react with sarcasm. This greater sense of peace can be thanks to lived experiences like losing loved ones, sending kids out into the world, surviving cancer, and a worldwide pandemic. Those events certainly made me consider what is important and precious. And there are regular practices that connect me to my spirituality, like yoga, deep breathing, meditation, and gratitude. The question of how we can be peaceful also brings me to consider those around me. My kids are one example. Steve and I always talk about how lucky we are to have such good kids. They are good kids. They're not troublemakers or tricksters. And when others poke fun at them or treat them badly, they don't start fights, they don't complain, they don't gossip about the person who did them wrong. Another person I strongly admire for her peaceful nature is my mother-in-law. Some of you may know her, Dina. She has never raised her voice in my presence in the nearly 27 years I've known her, and we have spent a lot of time together. Nor has she talked badly about other people. When it comes to her interactions with others, her focus is on bringing joy to her family and her friends and finding ways to contribute to her community and the wider world. So maybe my greater sense of peace is also from those I've been fortunate to be surrounded by. I have a stronger desire, or maybe I have a stronger need, to respond to situations that are out of my control in a more peaceful way. I believe we all have it in us to grow throughout our lives, including to become more peaceful. If we can make this a practice in every area of our lives, I believe this is how we can bring peace to our friends, our family, our community, and by extension, the wider world. But we have to be willing to do that internal work.
I like to play records, the old vinyl kinds of records, and I have this old-fashioned looking record player. It's not really old-fashioned, but it was made to look that way. And it's simple, you just plug it in, put the record on. And I've kept many of my old albums. Some of them go back 60 years. Some of my favorite albums are by Yusuf Islam, who you might know by his former stage name, Cat Stevens. Yeah. Remember his song, Peace Train? Now I've been crying lately, thinking about the world as it is. Why must we go on hating? Why can't we live in bliss? Out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Peace train, take this country, come take me home again. Right now, a lot of us are feeling the angst of the senseless, brutal war that Russia is waging against the people of Ukraine. All of the violence, the death, the destruction, the displacement of so many people, some of whom have come here, and some of our congregation members have taken them in and are helping them to start a new life in a land very far away from their home. We're doing what we can to help, but I think for many of us, we feel helpless, and we wish we could do more to end the violence, stop the aggression, but we can't. Is it possible to wage peace? Is it possible to grow it within ourselves? We pay lip service to peace, right? We write songs about it, we send and receive holiday cards, peace on earth, goodwill to all. It's such a deeply moving sentiment, but is it anything more than that? It feels as if we relegate the concept of peace to a far-off ideal. And in doing that, we defer it to some future time. It goes back into the box with the leftover Christmas cards. Peace on earth. Maybe next year. On a daily basis, we see ample evidence that as a species, we are violent. It seems to be stitched into our DNA. Are we capable of living in peace? Can it be learned? What gives me hope is that I've learned that there are a couple of dozen societies in different parts of the world that rarely, if ever, experience violence. Yeah, it's actually a thing. The Pali Inns in the Tamu state of southern India, the Buid of Mindoro Island in the Philippines, the Juhoansi, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing these wrong, the Juhoansi people of northern Namibia, southern Angola, and Botswana, the Bihors of Jharkhand, India. These societies tend to have small numbers of people and to be isolated. What defines them is that nonviolence is one of their highest societal goals. They proudly self-identify, not resting bitch face, but peace, nonviolence. They're committed to nonviolence, and they practice peaceful conflict resolution. They've developed strong societal structures to resolve conflicts if and before they become aggressive. Bruce Bonta in 1996 researched peaceful societies from various parts of the world and wrote about it. What is probably more comprehensible to us as Westerners and Americans is to look at peaceful ways of interacting that have been developing in Europe. If you think about it, the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Greenland, and and the Faroe Islands, they have not engaged against each other in war since 1815. It may not seem like a long time, but look at us in comparison. And there have been disputes that others might have gone to war over, but they have consciously adopted non-warring norms, values, and practices. They focus on negotiation, mutual respect, and collaboration within the Nordic nations and territories. They even created a Nordic Council of Ministers, which is an overarching organization that promotes something called the Nordic Peace brand. It aims to promote peace and nonviolent conflict resolution. Waging war amongst the Nordic nations has become unthinkable for them. And actually, if you think about it, we don't look at it this way, but the same is true of the European Union. At the end of World War II, as we all know, much of Europe was destroyed. It was in tatters. European leaders, led by a diplomat named Jean Monnet, not the painter, a diplomat, worked collaboratively with citizens across the continent to learn from the devastation of war, to unify Europe as a region and promote a vision of peace and prosperity. Europe has undergone a huge transformation in the past 76 years. The founders of the European Union started by removing trade barriers, and that's how we think of the European Union. But slowly, the European Union has developed cooperation and peaceful ways to enhance economic and political interdependence. The official EU website sums it up this way: what began as a purely economic union has evolved into an organization spanning policy areas like climate, environment, health, to external relations and security, justice, and migration. In 2012, the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to the European Union for transforming Europe, quote, from a continent of war to a continent of peace. Okay. Practicing peace is possible, but it doesn't happen unless and until we value it highly enough. Human beings can commit to a peaceful life and lifestyle. People can create processes for avoiding and resolving conflict, and armed conflict can be avoided. It requires hard work. Disagreements are inevitable. How we respond to them can be changed. Peace is a state of mind, requiring us to set aside some of our distrust, our hatred, our anger, and to view others as us rather than them. We have to believe that we can gain more from peaceful resolution than we can from aggression. And you know, Unitarian Universalism offers a very concrete plan. Always, right? Now, it hasn't been easy and it hasn't been straightforward. In fact, coming to terms with peace has been a long, difficult process for Unitarians and Universalists. To start with, the UUs had to define, what do we mean by peace? Okay, because it can mean different things to different people. Some of us think that pure pacifism, for whom violence is always to be avoided, is the right way to go. Others believe that at times war may be justified and it may be necessary, but that it should be the last resort, and it should be subjected to moral criticism and ethical constraints. So this is a division of belief that can get very real, and our core values about how to treat others when we disagree have been tested, especially in times of war. During the Civil War, Unitarians supported the Union and pacifists were marginalized. During World War I, pacifist Unitarians were ostracized by the American Unitarian Association, which imposed economic sanctions on congregations whose ministers did not support the war. Some pacifist ministers, both Unitarian and Universalist, lost their jobs. In World War II, the association once again supported the war, but learned from its mistake and was more supportive of pacifists and conscientious objectors. The Vietnam War came along and UUs were divided, but this time the tables had turned, and it was the anti-war activists who caused the non-pacifists to feel cast out. Wow. We've had it all different ways, haven't we, as a religion? So how does our beloved religious community work to grow peace? Peace is intentionally built into our sixth principle. We covenant to promote and support, quote, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Those words have meaning. And the Unitarian Universalist Association, or UUA, has worked to develop a more concrete guidance. In 2006, the General Assembly posed the following question for congregations to consider over the next few years. The question is, or was, should the Unitarian Universalist Association reject the use of any and all kinds of violence and war to resolve disputes between peoples and nations? And should it adopt a principle of seeking just peace through nonviolent means? That's a difficult question to answer in an inclusive manner, in an entire religion. The congregations considered it carefully. It went to each congregation and they reviewed the question and they came up with their answers. And this led to the statement of conscience that came from the UUA in 2010. And that statement challenges us as congregations and as individuals to engage in a variety of nonviolent and peace-building practices. I'd like to read the statement to you in its entirety. It's kind of long, so please settle in and close your eyes. And if you fall asleep, hopefully the person next to you will quietly nudge you. And I hope we will give it deep consideration. Quote, "We believe all people share a moral responsibility to create peace, mindful of both our rich heritage and our past failures to prevent war, and enriched by our present diversity of experience and perspective, we commit ourselves to a radically inclusive and transformative approach to peace. Our commitment to creating peace calls us to the work of peace building, peacemaking, and peacekeeping." And then it defines those terms. Peace building is the creation and support of institutions and structures that address the roots of conflict, including economic exploitation, political marginalization, the violation of human rights, and a lack of accountability to law. Peacemaking is the negotiation of equitable and sustainable peace agreements, mediation between hostile parties, and post-conflict rebuilding and reconciliation. Peacekeeping is early intervention to prevent war, stop genocide, and monitor ceasefires. Peacekeeping creates the space for diplomatic efforts, humanitarian aid, and non-violent conflict prevention through the protection of civilians and the disarmament and separation of those involved in violent conflict. We advocate a culture of peace through a transformation of public policies, religious consciousness, and individual lifestyles. At the heart of this transformation is the readiness to honor the truths of multiple voices from a theology covenanted and grounded in love. We all agree that our initial responses to conflict should be the use of nonviolent methods. Yet we bear witness to the right of individuals and nations to defend themselves and acknowledge our responsibility to be in solidarity with others in countering aggression. Many of us believe force is sometimes necessary as a last resort, while others of us believe in the consistent practice of nonviolence. We repudiate aggressive and preventive wars, the disproportionate use of force, covert wars, and targeting that includes a high risk to civilians. We support international efforts to curtail the vast world trade in armaments and call for nuclear disarmament and abolition of other weapons of mass destruction. We repudiate unilateral interventions and extended military occupations as dangerous new forms of imperialism. In an interdependent world, true peace requires the cooperation of all nations and people. And finally, our faith calls us to create peace, yet we confess that we have not done all that we could to prevent the spread of armed conflict throughout the world. At times we have lacked the courage to speak and act against violence and injustice. At times we have lacked the creativity to speak and act in constructive ways. At times we have condemned the violence of others without acknowledging our own complicity in violence. We affirm a responsibility to speak truth to power, especially when unjust power is exercised by our own nation. Too often, we have allowed our disagreements to distract us from all that we can do together. This statement of conscience challenges individual Unitarian Universalists as well as our congregations and association to engage with more depth, persistence, and creativity in the complex task of creating peace. That is the 2010 Statement of Conscience from our Unitarian Universalist Association. But as we all know in this church, belief has to be followed by action. So we are encouraged to practice peace at all levels of human interaction. I realize most of us are pretty busy and there are a lot of to-dos on our to-do list. We can't drop everything, but there are some things that we could do and that we could commit to doing and that we are already doing. Looking at our larger society, we can support the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee in ending the use of torture and addressing institutional violence in all of its forms. We can support the Unitarian Universalist Peace Ministry in its work of identifying resources, disseminating information, and evaluating methods to create a culture of peace. We can support the Unitarian Universalist Association and become familiar with what's on its website. And we can support congregational initiatives aimed at eradicating all forms of cultural, political, and economic oppression. At the level of our congregation, we can provide training in compassionate communication and conflict resolution. We can develop and honor behavioral covenants in all aspects of our congregational life. We can work as you use and in cooperation with other faith traditions to reduce violence in our communities by supporting egalitarian economic development and conflict resolution. As individuals, we can recognize that peace begins with each of us. We can learn and practice the skills of compassionate communication. We can develop for ourselves and our congregation spiritual practices that cultivate inner peace. In times of stress, we can remember to breathe, practice breathing. We can go out of our way to be kind to vulnerable people. We all know who they are in the community, in our lives. We can be kind to animals. Don't eat them, don't wear them. Peace for me begins on my plate. We can speak out against prejudice and discrimination when we see it, because sometimes we do. We can look people in the eye and smile at them when we pass them on the street, maybe even say hello. Some of these actions are easy. Some of them are difficult. Some of them are time-consuming. If we are serious about growing peace, let's covenant to pick that which we do and challenge ourselves to do more. Oh, I've been smiling lately, thinking about the world as one, and I believe it could be. Someday it's going to come, 'cause out on the edge of darkness, there rides a peace train. Peace train, take this country, come take us all home again. So be it. Amen, and blessed be.